Good evening, everyone. We are happy to be here this evening for this event, this talk. We became friends and people who are coming from the creative industry. Someone is coming from jewelry, someone is coming from publishing, fashion, and pizza, and a pure artist. So something very, very interdisciplinary, like IED, Istituto Europeo di Design, is usually doing. And we do it in a context, kind of sacred space, un posto sacro for fashion, not only for fashion, for the city of Milan as well. Start with Maria Sole Ferragamo, and then we have Daniele Venturi and Franco Pepe, Anna Scalfi, again. So Maria Sole, first round of questions is about identity, so who we are. For you, that is very special because you bring a very important name, but your choice as an artisan, producer, fashion maker is to have your brand, your own brand. So how do you deal with that? How do you cope with that?
Hello, everybody. First of all, you know that this question is a question that I have deeply at heart. And when we have dinners with families or with people we don't know, we go around the table and we ask who you are, define yourself, but without saying what you do. I always reply I would say in Italian, desiderio irrequieto, costantemente insoddisfatto e sempre in cerca, animato da una grande passione. Moving to your question, because they're linked, this brought me to this desire, this passion to follow and somehow create my own path. I don't think you need to challenge a legacy or defeat a legacy, but perhaps to honor it. And that's what I've always felt throughout my journey. So mine was a very natural path. I discovered my passion for making creative jewelry that I was only 9 years old. And since then it evolved. If I would be doing something different if I wasn't born in this family, I've asked myself, I don't know the answer. I believe that we were all born with some strengths, and these strengths need to be by the reality, by the context, by experiences, by encounters. And for sure, the reality I encountered resonated with my strengths.
It's time for Daniele. For you, it's always about identity, but from another perspective, because of the work you do in Vogue Tea. It's about, the value of multicultural approach to information and fashion in general. And around this topic, there's a lot of misconceptions, like what is a cultural approach to fashion, or, only think about appropriation and stuff like that. So again, how do you deal with that?
So I think there are a lot of misconceptions about multicultural fashion and essentially showing up who you are in spaces. For me, who I am is a storyteller. That's the basis of who I am. I'm a storyteller. I'm a creative. But ultimately, my joy in my work is platforming and amplifying other people's stories. Making, a small pizza chef in a town in Naples, someone who's elevated and shown to the world. And so I think one of the misconceptions about multiculturalism is that we as individuals and where we come from isn't enough. And I think that be it people from disenfranchised backgrounds or people from privilege, I think being authentic in your story and how it's told and navigating that in the world of media is really important. I spoke about this earlier. One of the things that I'm known for at Vogue or T-Vogue and even when I've worked with Vogue, is I'm really big about who's holding the mic, who's telling the story, who's authoring the story. I'm very much dogmatic about having the right journalists report on the story in a space that they're native to. Because if you do it that way, the story will be more authentic and believable to the writer. So for instance, if we're covering a show in Milan Fashion Week, I'm going to hire an Italian writer because they'll be more familiar with the ecosystem of fashion in Italy. And as a reader, I'll get information I maybe wouldn't have gotten from a writer from the States. And also, it'll feel more authentic of a story. And so I think this idea of multiculturalism isn't a problem if you lean into who you are and step into spaces and tell stories that way.
So we go to Franco Pepe now. You dared to change pizza, which for Italians is something unheard and impossible. So there's the strength of a challenge here, but there's also the smartness and the knowledge and the ability to mix science together with an artistic approach. For you, the question of identity is related to the place you're coming from, which is Caiazzo. We know that you didn't move from there and you are feeding the community there. How much is important to bring this small town into a global visibility?
Parlo in italiano perché per me io ho un linguaggio universale, lo dico a tutti. Oggi fortunatamente arrivano 10-12 nazionalità diverse in quel paesino, dico che il mio linguaggio è il mio impasto, quindi con quell'impasto riesco a dialogare un po' con tutto il mondo. C'è stato un punto zero dove io, dopo un percorso fatto con mio padre è sorto con mio nonno, io sono nella terza generazione di panificatori. Negli anni 30 abbiamo iniziato col pane, poi con papà e nonno hanno iniziato a fare un po' di pizza negli anni 50. Papà nel 61 ha messo una pizzeria, io ho vissuto i miei anni in quella pizzeria, perché la pizzeria per mio padre era casa e lì abbiamo vissuto a conduzione familiare, ho vissuto i miei anni. C'è stato un percorso quando papà era il pizzaiolo, io di sera aiutavo a lui, quindi un percorso dove io ho fatto pure degli studi, sono un ex insegnante di attività motorie, ho una specializzazione sul sostegno, quindi la mattina insegnavo, facevo tanto sport prima e la sera diventavo pizzaiolo con papà. Dopo questo percorso, nel 2012, dopo la perdita di mio padre, una grande riflessione, mi fermo su un punto zero. Lavoravamo in piazza nella pizzeria, anche se è un piccolo centro di 100.000 anime, io e i miei fratelli. Loro non hanno condiviso la mia idea, io sentivo dentro di fare qualcosa per questo prodotto che era così popolare, ma c'era tanta confusione e tanta poca conoscenza anche da parte dei pizzaioli. In realtà noi paghiamo molto lo scotto che l'Italia, per esempio, oggi è rappresentata nel mondo dalla pizza, ma vergognosamente non c'è una scuola istituzionale in Italia che forma i pizzaioli, quindi l'aspetto tecnico-scientifico manca alla conoscenza dei pizzaioli. Quindi io ho fatto presente pure all'istituzione ultimamente, noi oggi non abbiamo chi forma i pizzaioli, perché oggi si parla di mangiare in modo giusto, in modo sano, è giusto che ci sia data anche una certa formazione al pizzaiolo. Questo percorso iniziato nel 2012, un percorso che è iniziato con pochissime ragazze, ma solo con le mie idee, e oggi dopo 13 anni in quel paesino lì accogliamo, bloccando le prenotazioni, 13.000 persone al mese. Ho più di 50 ragazzi che stanno lavorando lì proprio a quest'ora. Stasera accolgono 400 persone, blocchiamo 400 persone al giorno, arriva il mondo lì. E questo non mi aspettavo tutto ciò, l'ho accolto, ma soprattutto al di là dell'accoglienza di questo messaggio importante che arriva da tutto il mondo, ho cercato di rispettare il cliente. Questa è una cosa che mio padre mi ha insegnato tantissimo, come rispettarlo, con una giusta formazione, con un giusto prodotto al cliente, il cliente lo ha percepito, io nel mio team, oltre a formare sala, cucina, pizzaioli, io oggi ho un team scientifico dove c'è una biologa, una nutrizionista, un agronomo, quindi c'è un'attenzione sulla scelta della materia prima e ho parlato di cucina applicata alla pizza e quindi come trasformare la pizza in un prodotto anche sano, perché negli anni precedenti c'è stato sempre un concetto di buono e non buono sulla pizza, ma per parlare di sano ci voleva una risposta tecnica, una risposta scientifica.
This is something that puts you in common with Anna, despite you're coming from completely different and opposite, fields, sectors. If Anna is to be considered as an artist, like a real artist, and she's an artist that I appreciate a lot because she's always thinking to the impact that art makes on society. And so also this is part of the question. I would like to remember my favorite action you did during COVID when you brought a supermarket into a theater, because that was the only way for the theater to be alive, to have people inside. So if you look at the pictures, that is very powerful. And so the question for you is more about collectivity and collective identity. So what role does art play in collective identity?
I try to experiment every day with the tools that I collected in my education. I try to activate a dialogue with the context, with the historical context, the space, the community involved in the context, jurisdictional structure of the place. And so in a sort of co-work, a co-progettazione, I have an approach in the context like a play field. I try to understand the rules of the field, and I try to share with everybody my point of view, and I let the action, the artifact, the organizational artifact, the sculpture, what we do together. I try to leave. I try to let the organism grow alone.
We have a second round of questions, and the first was who we are, and the second is what we do. So we start again from Marisole. So why is it important to focus on artisanal jewelry today?
Nowadays, we constantly hear about AI, automation. So nowadays, more perhaps than in other times, I feel that what you can do by hand, what's irreplaceable that you can do by hand, is becoming more and more precious. Jewelry is conceived to be something precious, and this brings us to, at least in my case, to a question on value. What makes something valuable and precious, right? And in my case, it's not the material, because I work with abandoned material, with leftover leather or metal, but it's what you do with it and how you work with it. And I always like to use the Italian word for craftsmanship, which is artigianato, that contains the word arte in it, because I believe that in what you can do with your hands, there's a work of the art and of the heart. So with your hands, you're able to inject your soul, the energy in what you're creating, and that's what makes the object, the final piece, unique, because what I will do with my hands will be different from what you do. And so that's why for me it's very important, because it also in a way enhances that intimate relationship that I believe you tend to establish more with a piece of jewelry than with other items you wear or interact with.
Second question for Danielle, the magazine. So the magazine in the traditional print sense somehow is losing ground to its digital channel. It's all digital today. But what role do curatorship and editorial authority play in this world of digital algorithm-driven feeds and posts and opinions and blah?
To me, it's a conversation around content and information and the way that we, as people, as global citizens, receive information. And in the States, as I'm sure in Italy, but in the States, there's a lot of channels to receive information. One of my favorite questions I ask people are, how do you get your news? And sometimes they'll say Twitter, sometimes they'll say, oh, I have New York Times app. Some people, still read newspapers. And then some people get it from blogs or Instagram or TikTok. A lot of young people get their information or their news from TikTok. I think the question or the concern really is with the media literacy. So where you're getting your information from, is it credible? And I think that, in essence, is actually more valuable than it's ever been. So while the medium of magazine is having an evolutionary period, where I actually think it's fine because, even in this space that we're in, we're seeing a huge uptick in niche publications, bi-monthly or quarterly magazines, books that we call them. They're having a huge renaissance now where it's not necessarily legacy publications like Vogue or Architectural Digest, but, smaller sort of magazines are having a great moment right now. I think the biggest concern really is, where are you getting your information from? Where are you getting your news from? And is it from a trade journalist who's been taught about who, what, where, when, context, all of those things? And so I think the challenge really for magazines is to show up in spaces with authority and really embrace sort of the evolving technology to our advantage. What I mean is, I use AI as a journalist now for headlines, right? So I'm going to report the story the same way I would report it, but for the headline and the depth, right? The sort of thing that people see first that brings them to the story. I use AI to figure out, how do I best write that headline so it comes up at the first page when you Google Dua Lipa? How is that the first story you see in the news page for Dua Lipa when you Google her? That's how we are, one of the ways that we're embracing the new evolved technology to become relevant. I also think twofold, in addition to embracing AI and different types of technology, something that we think a lot about at Condé Nast is consumer revenue, right? And so we have these amazing legacy brands. Teen Vogue is 21 years old this last year. We're turning 22 this year. We've got Vogue, GQ, all of these amazing publications at Condé Nast. And what we've realized over the past 10 years is that it's not just about that book, right? It's consumer revenue. So it's membership models, having paywalls where people come to our site. It's live events. GQ had an amazing Super Bowl event. Vogue has Vogue World, which was, it's in Los Angeles this year. Teen Vogue, we have our summit every year, which is our in-person ticketed event. It's thinking of multiple ways to be duplicitous in a business model. It's not just about opening up a magazine and reading it. It's, how do I, as a brand, show up in different spaces and still interact and have relevancy with our audience?
The point is, all this content is in a cloud. So clouds are raining sometimes. Or if they are not raining, maybe a bomb is dropped on the server and you lose everything. So if, I don't know, aliens come on the Earth, they would think, finding cell phones and beds, they would think that we only had two gods, LB and Apple, right? So the point is more about humanity. I mean, where all our informations are stored into nowhere. So, Franco, pizza. Pizza is a design product. You to its iconic. So pizza has to be round, colors are white, red. So you have redesigned the very idea of dot, like the mold, also. And is this innovation or resistance? Is it something build an icon even more, or is iconoclasm like a challenge to the icon? What, in terms of design, what you did is what?
La mia evoluzione è stata nel mettere in discussione la tradizione, correggere gli errori della tradizione, che ho messo in discussione tutto quello che abbiamo fatto io e mio padre insieme, quindi correggendo i propri errori c'è stata un'evoluzione del progetto e della mia idea. Ho sentito parlare Maria Sole di qualcosa che mi appartiene, le mani, l'artigianalità. Sui miei bigliettini da visita c'è scritto artigiano della pizza, ok? Quindi l'artigianalità mi appartiene, anche perché una cosa importante era raccontare che quelle 12.000-13.000 persone al mese che arrivano, in rapporto 1 a 2, noi lavoriamo 24-25.000 pizze al mese, vengono lavorate, quell'impasto viene lavorato a mano. Io ho utilizzato la tecnologia solo a supporto dell'uomo in quel progetto, ma non sostituire l'uomo. La tecnologia, soprattutto in quel lavoro, come la pizza, l'artigianalità, poteva solo standardizzare un monoprodotto che non ti dava nessuna identità. Io l'identità l'ho ritrovata attraverso una scelta io utilizzo una farina che è mia, non è in commercio, ci sono 3 tipologie di grani che io scelgo che vanno in quel blend e lì parte la mia identità. La tecnologia deve essere alla nostra disponibilità e supporto, ma mai sostituire l'uomo. Quindi pensate che io ho una squadra di impastatori, sono 4-5 elementi che hanno 4-5 teste diverse, 8-10 braccia diverse, un approccio tattile diverso, mi impastano circa 1000-1200 panetti al giorno, ma l'impasto deve uscire uguale. La cosa più difficile è stata formare la squadra degli impastatori. Che cosa riesco a trasmettere al palato al cliente quando morde uno spicchio della mia pizza? Poi io lavoro sui sensi, sul tatto, sulla vista, sull'olfatto, su tutto. Quando devi insegnare a un fornaio a cuocere una pizza, innanzitutto hai 2 elementi: se non c'è tecnologia, c'hai gli occhi e il colore dei mattoni del forno ti danno un'idea della temperatura. E poi se si utilizza le pale in ferro, se la pala in ferro, quando tu la metti nel forno, ha un tintiglio acuto, ok, puoi inserire la pizza. Se invece è tonfo, significa che c'è una temperatura molto alta e devi inserire la pizza.
Si può fare una pizza con l'intelligenza artificiale?
Serve tutto, come ha detto pure, serve l'intelligenza artificiale. Ma l'intelligenza artificiale è fatta di tanti elementi, no? La mia creatività è che con pochi elementi deve emozionare il palato delle persone.
Con l'affermarsi dell'intelligenza artificiale, molto probabilmente i basic skills saranno considerati ovvi, mentre ciò che farà la differenza forse sarà l'errore. E infatti tu parli di pizza sbagliata.
Sì, parlo di pizza sbagliata, poi questa pizza che anche dal punto di vista visivo, no, di creativa, ci sono queste strisce in pomodoro, quelle rappresentano su quella margherita sbagliata. Io ho dovuto parlare di sbaglio, perché ho toccato la margherita che è la scelta per eccellenza. Quindi sono dichiarato uno sbaglio per fare qualcosa di buono.
Però la cosa bella è che se noi adesso prendiamo tutto il ragionamento che tu hai fatto e alla parola pizza sostituiamo borsa, scarpa, libro, scuola o qualsiasi cosa di cui noi ci occupiamo, il ragionamento sta in piedi. Quindi a me piace molto questo discorso che anche una pizza può essere valutata con i termini del design. As I used to work in fashion, people, journalists and so on, even students, used to ask me if fashion is art or business. And my answer was always, why are you asking me that? Isn't art also a business? I mean, if you read Vasari, right, and the history of the artists during Renaissance, he explains very well that they were spending more time in finding money for their creativity than creating, actually their pieces of art. So, but on the other hand, art is undoubtedly something that brings emotional messages, something that can be also very strong, emotionally speaking. So where is the balance between the things?
For me, the market is in itself also content of the art practice. I don't want to think the market is something else. Not now we're joking. No. Market has to be involved in the process of the production of the work, because the way in which you find the resource to build a project is still part of the project. Yes, maybe I spend the 90% of my time organizing the production, done with the pleasure to create something. And but it's a good way to understand how something is shared as the sense of what we're doing, because the answer of the institution, of the grant, of the community.
Do you, while you are doing your work, do you forecast, do you figure out in advance what will be the emotion that you will give to people when they will see the finished act of art, like piece of art?
Me too. I'm so proud when I see the work.
Yeah.
Me too, because I tried to have a clean conceptual design. But when I've seen for the first time the flags with the first percentage of women in the museum, something else emerged from the installation. When a work is done, it's never finished, because the work gives more than what you think to put inside. When I made the supermarket in the theater, in order to open it, it was the first time that entered the theater, and somebody entered because it was a supermarket without the power of the culture, because sometimes it is a theater, is a museum. You don't permit yourself to go inside and be able to appreciate the culture. Some part of the project I understand when it's working with the visitors, the public, con la fruizione del lavoro stesso.
Well, again, this is something that you cannot reproduce electronically.
In Verdi, now for the Biennale, it was not just around the corner, the former court law. So I worked in the last 15 years with an amazing technician, Christian Potzer. He has a company, and he took the 4 rooms and a small courtyard with a 3D system. So I made the setup virtually before to do it in practice. Of course, it was the conceptual, the historical research, the conceptual drawing, and everything is made. But when you try then to put the object in the space, I made very easily with a technical tool.
We use advanced tools today, but we do it in a primitive way. So, for example, we have a cell phone, which is very advanced technology, because there's a glass to it and everything, but the way you use it is just tapping with the finger, which is very primitive, right? Or if we think to the use of emojis and vocals, today it brings communication back to a former stage that is not written. It's when culture was asked through voice, and hieroglyphics, basically. So, but we do it with technology. So again, with the very advanced tools. So how does this translate, if it does, into your production or artisanal conception, and what will we leave behind to future generations in this way?
The first thing that I was reflecting on is that I have a feeling that all of this technology is making us quite lazy. Again, we shouldn't lose a certain curiosity towards complexity and making an effort, because two things. One, I believe that behind any design that appears simple, like a pizza, there's so much work. These are the design pieces that require the most work. And the end result of this work and study and thoughtfulness behind is something that seems effortless, right? But there's a lot of work behind that. And the other thing is, so what appears simple doesn't mean that it was simple to make or to create. And the other thing I was reflecting on is that it's true that we use emojis and vocals, but an emoji would never make you, give you the same feelings or of a beautiful written sentence, or even more of a handwritten note. So again, I think it's about thinking where you can replace something or enhance something with the use of technology, and where there's something that's not replaceable, like an emotion. And so, to talking about the next generation, I don't know how the future is going to look like, but what I would like to hope is that we still remain thinking humans, and anything we do comes from a deep-rooted thought process and from eyes wide open on reality, from asking ourselves questions and not taking anything for granted or doing it in an automatic way.
Walter Benjamin wrote about the piece of art in the age of reproduction, which is also to be considered. I mean, the relationship between the production as a creation and reproduction as a recreation, so I think this is something that maybe in the world will solved already. Then, so there was a song at my when I was little, and the song was called "Video Kill the Radio Stars," but it didn't happen. It didn't kill anything. Every time we have a medium coming up, somehow there's a mix with the medium before. So basically now we still watch TV, but we watch it on YouTube. The same happens in fashion. We have sometimes a convergence. Think to Virgil Abloh, what he did. Like, for me, it's the ultimate representation of fashion evolution, because it brought the visual arts and the publishing into fashion at the beginning of, when you think to a garment that in the end is not even a garment anymore. It's something fashionable, but it's not necessarily a garment. Or you have the opposite attitude, like Eddie Slimane, which is going back to garage punk, clothing and outfits and so on, and music as well, like a reaction to the convergence. I think we don't have in these new generations a very clear distinction between cultures and subcultures, between mainstream and alternative, between old and new, because they mix things together, between local and global, which goes back to your first question. Is it just a matter of styling, or there's something more behind and eventually ahead?
Well, you mentioned Virgil Abloh, who, when people asked him what he did, he said he was a creator. He went to school for architecture, but he also was a fashion designer. He was a creative thinker, a globalist, creative director. We often say at Teen Vogue that he was kind of the catalyst for a lot of other people to do similar things. I think of Milano Tomorrow at IED, but also the head designer at Off-White. I think of Pharrell Williams, who has this prolific music career and is now the head of Louis Vuitton. I think that what we're going to see and what we need to see, quite honestly, from young people in this post-virtual wave is a duplicity of skills. Not being siloed into one sort of career path, but being open to transferring your skills of creativity into different mediums. I think that, I did a talk a couple months ago at Parsons in New York, and I sat down with Bethan Hardison, who's an icon. She's a modeling agent, but a model, amazing. And she said to me before the talk, we're supposed to be talking to all these young designers, and she was like, I'm gonna keep it real. Most of them will never be designers. And I'm gonna tell them that. They need to figure out other skills. You need to be honest. If you're trying to be the future head of a design house, how many of those roles are open? Really? Could you do communications? Could you do marketing? Could you do textile work? Could you do accounting? What are other ways to show up in fashion other than being someone's CD? And I think before, it was kind of something said, now it is a requirement. You have to be duplicitous in your skill set. Even me, as a journalist, I'm a classically trained journalist, but I can do a panel, I can creative direct. Most of my job when I'm at work is producing photo shoots, I'm approving photos, I'm editing copy, I'm doing accounting work, I do line sheets for budgets, for the whole budget for Teen Vogue. I have multiple skills. I can't just say, well, I'm a journalist, so all I'm going to do is write and report all day. And so I think the challenge for young people is be honest, right? And then figuring out how to show up in the space in some way or some form of shape that serves your purpose. And it's a very sobering thing, but it's the truth, It's not the same medium it used to be. There are so many people, the sheer scale to even run a fashion brand at this point, and the amount of competitors in the market is overwhelming. And so the likelihood of being successful in that space, it's not to say don't do it. It's not to say don't play big, but maybe if you're studying design in school, maybe also learn the business side, right? Maybe also learn a little bit about marketing. Maybe learn social media, how to promote a brand. It's uncomfortable, but in the end, it's something I tell young people to do all the time, have other skill sets. It kind of reminds me of what Maria Sol was talking about she went to school for architecture, but those same skills are applied for jewelry making, right? Like, you can't be siloed in your skill set. It needs to be able to transfer in other spaces. And so and I'm sure you running a business, you have to think about, inventory and scale and pricing and all of that. And as your own designer, it's something that you have to be aware of when you run a business. So you can't be siloed and I'm only going to do this one thing. You have to be, it's uncomfortable, but to be successful, you have to be open in that way, right? I mean, it's just what it is.
Yes and no.
Okay.
I think that you need to be open to learning and doing other things. But in my case, I feel that I'm ultra specialized in what I do. Like my approach to jewelry is extremely specific. Like when people say, "Ah, you're the jeweler, you work with gold," I have no idea. Not no idea, but I'm like super specific about something that allowed me to perhaps innovate in this specific way of making jewelry. So going back to education, I think that learning many skill sets, the risk that I see there is that the level of education remains average. Whereas if you deep dive into something very specific, then you can really like excel. But what's super important is to be open and curious to learn another skill set or to apply what you've learned to other skills.
I visited MoMA's exhibition called Items is Fashion Modern a few years ago, and I thought to find something futuristic there, according to the title. Instead, I found very basic items like a white t-shirt or a perfecto or, the flannel grunge shirts, So very basic, very old. Or for mentioning the friend, Joana Vasconcelos, who's an artist. She created a giant cake as a building. So going back somehow to something like childish as a feeling, And if you look at Apple products, they look like brown transistors of the 60s, 70s maybe. So the question is, why everything new in the very end is looking old?
Io ho parlato prima di mettere in discussione la tradizione per avere la giusta evoluzione, però mai abbandonare oppure mai sminuire quella che poi è stata la tradizione. Quindi io pure quando creo una ricetta per emozionare al palato un cliente, la cosa bella è una ricetta complessa, è una ricetta dove c'è tanta cucina applicata, e quando mettono quello spicchio di pizza in bocca è la cosa bellissima quando gli dicono mi ricordo mia nonna, mia mamma, cioè è bellissimo che la mia creatività sta nel portare al palato del cliente delle emozioni che hanno un ricordo del passato, ma la pizza è stata realizzata con tecniche avanzate rispetto al passato. Quindi l'evoluzione, però il ricordo del passato, è una cosa bellissima per me.
And with you, I would like to touch the topic of urban living. And I'm mentioning now Berlin, because Berlin is crossroads between East and West, North and South, but it's also a historical one, because since the fall of the Berlin Wall, the world changed completely. From that moment, we had globalization and the end of ideologies. As humans, we tend to apply mental schemes to other fields. So if a political ideology is falling, also commercial ideology is falling, and so on, So, for example, from that moment, in fashion, we didn't sell total look anymore. The city is very important. From this point of view, the city is creating changes in history. And Berlin, especially, it's a city where a lot happened and history really changed there. How do art cities work? And what will be their role after COVID? Because again, that after COVID, some cities changed a bit, like less people around, less activities, like less dynamic. This is New York, basically. No? So what do you think about that?
And the gentrification process in Berlin is very strong. Crazy price, people come back maybe in Italy. is no more the city poor and sassy. Maybe the idea of freedom of Berlin could grow in every city, in our practices and in our approach of collaboration. And in perspective of the next generation, the time doesn't exist. Because every moment is the absolute moment of our destiny, our history, our conscience. And yesterday I was in Ostuni, putting the seed ladder with 7 meters without steps. Because if the global temperature arrives at 2 degrees, the sea will rise of 7 meters. So we can see exactly what will be part of the global swimming hole. Is a part of the project of the Ostuni municipality and the Venice Climate League. And this project plus 2 degrees, you can see the 7 meters as already with the water and then without water, because the iron is brown, is like already touched from the salt and from the water of the sea.
Yeah.
And so is a...
Well, that's very clear. I think you mentioned 3 key values. One is freedom, and one is collaboration, and then all the attention to climate and the relationship between the city, what is urban and what is not, and what potentially is disruptive or negative or the end of the world or something like that.
And I think that we are really involved in a global reassurance, and but if we try to play this perspective of possible future, yes, there is a great big solidarity.
The question before was the past of the future, and this question is the future of the past. So the question is, what does designing tomorrow mean to you?
I might be a bit bold in my answer, but I design for today. I mean, I think that design needs to be, but I will explain this answer. I think that design is a reflection of the time we live. I think that creation is energy that constantly evolves, taking each time a different shape. And that's why perhaps looking at something new, going back to the question you asked, Franco, there's always like an element of the past, because I feel that the energy is the same, but the form is different. That's why you look at 2 clouds and they're not the same, but they're made of the same energy. Let's say in 50 years, if people look at my designs, to recognize that they were made today in this present moment, because they respond to reality, necessities, to the sense of the time. Asking ourselves questions and using our creativity in an intelligent way. So, for instance, just to give you like one example, is designing with longevity in mind. So, not in my case, like creating a piece of jewelry, I can design just to follow a specific trend, knowing that it will fade away in 3 or 6 months. But trying to design things that are an expression of the time, but that will perhaps last and go beyond the present time, but still speak about this time.
I wrote the piece in the top of this year for Teen Vogue about African fashion and how there's been sort of this renaissance of exhibits all over London, New York, LA, of African designers. There's this huge interest. Even the Met Gala this year was celebrating dandyism and, Black fashion spaces. And one of the things that I found in my research is that there is a lot of discussion about this excitement around African designers, but not a lot of funding to go behind this excitement. And so it was kind of being critical of that, red race with lack of funding, with lack of support. One of the things that I found is that there's a lot of conversation around sustainability and using materials and regeneration and all of that, which is great. And that's the future of fashion and where we should be going. But if you look at a lot of the work that African designers are doing and have been doing, they've been doing that same work for years, right? And it wasn't a matter of what was in the zeitgeist. It was just a matter of the tools and the things available for them. Even in the architecture of at least West Africa, where I'm from, we always used, sustainable mud to build homes, sustainable things to build roofs. And we're always thinking about the land, how we can use natural elements as a way to sort of keep the cycle going. And so what I'm saying is I think a lot of the future conversations should look at the past and see things that have already been done and kind of go back to the source. A lot of our ancestors did this work in thinking about the future. I think there's a huge disconnect, not just with young people, I just think as a society, with really accessing our memories and our history. And if you look back there, we would see that a lot of the future planning was thinking about ways to give the earth to replenish the earth. One of the things I'd love to see is that, right, is thinking about, specifically for fashion, thinking about small scale production, thinking about artisans and, really leaning into the craft of it all. Funding, supporting financially brands that are doing that work, right? Not funding these large, fast fashion brands that aren't thinking about the future, that aren't thinking about global waste, that aren't having those conversations in a really genuine way. They're doing a lot of greenwashing and saying that they're doing the work, but they're not. And so instead of talking about it, truly investing in the brands and the people doing that work is where I'd like to see the future of design and creativity go, is really backing up with your dollar or your euro, brands that are thinking about being conscious and intentional about building brands and companies and things, products for the future.
Cosa significa progettare il futuro? E soprattutto nel mio campo è difficile. La vedo un po' veramente, c'ho poche speranze, è difficile. Ho parlato ultimamente con le istituzioni, con il governo, parlavo prima che non c'è ancora, non si può progettare, no? Progettare, abbiamo bisogno di competenze per poter progettare, di saperi. Se non ci sono i saperi, se non ci sono le competenze, che cosa progettiamo? Voglio dire, noi già quello che abbiamo fatto e quello che ho fatto sul mondo pizza già è tanto, ma come l'ho fatto? Con gli studi che ho fatto, con la squadra tecnico-scientifica, non ho creato solo la pizzeria, mi sono dovuto organizzare per avere quello step in più sulla pizza, e quindi, ma soprattutto l'ho fatto perché lo si deve di fare. Ma chi è che lo fa? Voglio dire, il futuro quale sarà? Per esempio, parlo del mondo pizza, del food. Oggi noi sappiamo benissimo che tutto il mondo del food è in crisi. Sì, è vero che troviamo lo stellato, ma il mondo del food è in crisi perché non ci sono persone che vogliono più fare questo tipo di lavoro. Oggi tutto il mondo del food è in crisi. Io ne parlavo ieri, ero in Franciacorta con tanti chef stellati, c'è questa crisi. Allora come si può progettare se c'è questa crisi del non voler lavorare? Secondo me oggi abbiamo bruciato le nuove generazioni. Oggi il food lo trovi solo per l'80% è sul telefonino, sui social, su tutto. Oggi le mani in pasta le mettono in pochi. E quindi oggi dobbiamo fare questa. Vorrei dire una cosa, oggi sono arrivato a Milano, facevo un caldo tremendo, ho detto ho voglia di qualcosa, un qualcosa di fresco. Allora, no, trovo un gelato, ho detto vabbè vi faccio un caffè fritto, no, facciamo uno shakerato. Allora, è un locale bello, però voglio dire, il personale ben vestito, 4 persone lì dietro, non c'era nessuno, ho aspettato 15 minuti per avere un caffè shakerato, io ascoltavo loro che no, metti prima il ghiaccio, no, metti la cannella, 4 persone per un quarto d'ora per fare un caffè shakerato e non c'era nessuno. Allora ho detto, ho fatto la riflessione con Alessandro, ho detto questo è il problema del nostro settore. Oggi ci sono mancanze di competenze, quindi oggi progettare come si può progettare? Si può progettare se noi iniziamo a formare e trasmettiamo i nostri saperi.
Last word is for Anna.
Big responsibility
Responsibility, yes.
about designing tomorrow. Couldn't we design something without paid tomorrows?
Grazie a tutti.